Welcome back to the channel. In today's data deep dive, we were talking about one of the more established, desirable, and popular areas here west of the Orlando metro area. We're talking about Windermere, Florida in 34786. Much like Winter Park, much like parts of Lake Nona, this particular marketplace through the pandemic era, talking about 2020, particularly 2022, when there was a lot of loose economic policy, very low interest rates, lots of development planned all across the Orlando market. This particular market, much like the others I just mentioned, didn't have a lot of room for large development planning. It has already been kind of established. So as I often do, I'm going to take a deep dive with you so that if you own a home here now, or if you're considering buying one going into 2025, you'll have a clear picture of what to expect in the Windermere housing market. Let's get into it. All right, I have a treat for you. Look at this. The first graph I want to show you is Reventure. This is Reventure Consulting's data. This is what we call the home price forecast. And what this tells us is who has control in the market. Are the buyers gaining leverage over the sellers? Now, I wanted to show you this. Number one, you see, Jared, where does this come from? Well, this is an algorithm that's measuring the home appreciation rate, like is price getting aggressively hotter? How fast do homes sell? What is mortgage cost doing to this particular marketplace? Are there a lot of price cuts? All those kinds of things get blended in and you have a score. And everything across the dotted line means it's an even break between buyers and sellers. You can see that the latest trend, it's going towards the buyer favor, but it's not there yet. So, we're going to call this neutral probably all the way till it falls under this 50 line, which it looks like it's heading there gradually. And this is unusual because a lot of the markets in this particular area, you think of Windermere, you go towards Claremont, you go Davenport, you go towards Dr. Phillips, and they're already under the line. They're already in buyer favored territory based on inventory changes, things of that nature. So I want to start with that. Let's see what the market data is telling us as we move into 2025. All right, now this is the most recent month of data produced by the Florida Association of Realtors. So before you go in the comments, people are always curious, where am I getting this information? You have to have a real estate license. We can log into the back end of our data and pull these charts for you to see. Now look at the chart from the peak of 2022. To give you a quick backdrop, remember, we had this run up in price really in all markets when interest rates were around 2.5%, 3%, and everybody just had more money in the bank. So ultimately there was more trading and the market was fierce. What's typically happened in Orlando since, and where Windermere looks vastly different really than any other market that I watch through the Orlando metro, as I'm reporting on every single one of them in all 4 counties that make up the metro area. But look at this. Is it climbing? How's the market look? This is unusual. Obviously, there's a lot of steam in this market. Now, they did lose a little bit of steam, right? October came back down from the top. You can see it bounces back up and down through the middle. And ultimately, you watch the trend. Look at the trend is climbing. If you look at the last 7 or 8 months, look at how the market is shifting, right? It's clearly climbing. The other thing you want to consider is why this fall in October so suddenly. Hurricane Milton was part of the month that you see here. So that obviously had some softening effects. I don't necessarily know if it's going to go right back up and be on par another month from now, but we're going to find out. One thing that is unique for Windermere is there's been a lot of upward movement since the interest rates started to climb. And that is not common, okay? Go all through Orlando, as I mentioned, they're flat. Take Lake Nona, for instance. In all likelihood, we get buyers that call us that are considering Windermere. They're also considering Lake Nona. Lake Nona's luxury side, high end, their western zip code 32827, they struck a peak price summer, June 2022, and it's dipped. There's been an arc ever since they hit that number when interest rates were about to go bye-bye from 3% to 7.5%. When all of that started to shift, they started to lose ground and they've never come back to that peak. Whereas Windermere went right past it in 2022 and just continued to see. If you strike a line right down the middle, because that's really where the truth is. The truth kind of says, hey, they were rolling strong all the way up into early to mid 23, gave a little back and just picked it right back up. And median sale price, particularly for a market like Windermere, is the safest price. Average price is not as good because looking at median is going to take the extremes, the high end and the low end out of play and just kind of give you a down the middle look at how price is trending. And it's sustained and it looks good so far. Do not pay outdated models of commission. I've been warning you, don't do it. Things have changed. Call me today, save thousands. Make one call, that's all. List your home for just 3% and start packing.
Jared Jones is the way to go. Call 706-5000.
All right, the next thing I'm going to show you is unsold inventory in Windermere. Before you look at this chart and say, wow, it's really climbed in the last year and a half, 2 years. This is Winter Garden. Okay, now the reason I want to show you Winter Garden is because you can see that just a couple months ago, Winter Garden peaked at 440 units. And if you go all the way to the left, you can see that in a 7-year, 8-year history right here, Winter Garden's never had this level of inventory. Now let's take a look at Windermere. Look how low this is. Okay, so Windermere right now is bumping around at 200 units. Look at its history. If you look back pre-pandemic, which again, the reason why we always go before pandemic era is because this is such an anomaly. Like, we didn't run such low inventory levels. Where were we before? Okay, there were 250, 350 units, kind of in that range before that 2020 new market cycle happened. A lot of money from Washington, all this kind of stuff. But look where it's at now. If you look at the Orlando metro area, it had this dip and then it went way back over where it was back here. Most all the zip codes around Windermere, if this was where it was pre-pandemic, it's now up here. Windermere has the lock-in effect. And again, that means that the inventory that you would go choose and find for wherever you are in your price points, right? So if you're starting at the bottom, you're shopping in the top, whichever price point you're in, there's just not a lot of supply here. The next question we want to answer as we look over Windermere is the inventory tight because sellers aren't listing them? Or is the inventory tight because buyer demand, as soon as anything is listed, buyer demand is so aggressive that it's being sold off? Let's find out right now. All right, so new listings is obviously the pattern of supply hitting the market. Every year, there's this weird arc effect. See, this is beginning of the year, it goes up and it comes back down. Beginning of the year, goes up, comes back down, 2023. Beginning of the year, 22, goes up, comes back down. Look at history, okay? Again, this is a stable market. There wasn't a ton of housing units added, so we're roughly working with a similar count of houses that we had to sell back here. But look how high they were in the past. And at this point, you're not even passing 80. This is the 80 unit mark, 80 homes in a single month in the market. Look at the past, 80 units plus would hit the market for 4 or 5 months on any given year. Some months up to 120 units or 110 units. We've got 2 years running where not a single month is above 80 homes hitting the market in the entire zip code. Okay, so you see these tiny little hills compared with history, you still have a circumstance that for whatever reason, there's a lock-in effect. Okay, now the fascinating thing is this. Interest rates again in 2022 started to go up. Mid-year, we went 3% to 7.5% by like October of 2022. That forever changed the game because 30-year fixed just went through the roof, affects buyers. And again, Windermere has a lot of cash buyers, but it's still only like 25 or 30% of all transactions. You still have a lot of people buying homes in Windermere that are affected by the financial cost. This is also unique that you're not seeing this except for maybe Winter Park, where you have a very anemic volume. Most all of Orlando, any of the other markets around Windermere, the 2024 cycle ballooned a little higher than prior year. Now, this is most likely 24 will probably have a net higher increase of sellers listing, but it's super close. It isn't like, wow, it's a nice step back in the right direction. It's pretty even, okay? Now, I personally, when I see this kind of lock-in, it tells me that 2025 will probably have more activity from sellers than this year. I think Windermere will have circumstances where this is just a low number turnover for 2 years straight. And ultimately, some people can decide to stay and some people can wait and some people can put off those discretionary moves. I just think there's going to be circumstances that the economy is going to lend itself to. People are just going to decide to move for whatever reason. Hey, I've been waiting, but more people are going to be moving in 2025 than in the past 2 years, which I think will open up more opportunity to buyers. We'll see what happens. Hey, it's me interrupting myself. You considering selling your home? Make one call, that's all, and put my nearly 23 years of experience and nearly 4,000 homes sold to work for you.
Jared Jones is the way to go. Call 706-5000.
All right, now the next thing we want to see is, are the buyers backing away? New pending sales. This shows us how many contracts Windermere is seeing. Now look, see this activity arc every year? It's still there every single year. Look at the history of this market when they were running 80, again, 80 to 100, 80 to 100. But look where we are now, going back 3 years, there isn't a single month where there have been 80 contracts put out by buyers in this market. Where back in 2021, right here, all the way back in time, you would usually have multiple months or at least a few where you're at 80 or more. So you're having less inventory hitting the market, but you have buyers backing off in tandem. And again, you got 2 weak years where buyer activity is just super anemic, 2 years hitting, which just shows the market size is smaller. What's really interesting too, when you look at this market, is how sellers and buyers have backed off in tandem. So it's not like one is overproducing the other. Like a lot of the markets around Florida right now, you'll have the sellers stepped it up in 2024, but the buyers lagged behind. They didn't really come out and actually meet that demand. And you had the unsold inventory just kind of jumping. Whereas here, you don't have a lot of supply. You don't have a ton of buyers. It's at least enough of a mix where the market is still seller favored. I showed you that in the beginning. Also, remember, median price is cranking up. And ultimately, what's happening in terms of how much supply is there in relation to buyers, it's enough to still support price increases. And so if you're looking at 3, 4, 7, 8, 6, you find something in demand, the seller is going to look at you and be like, it's my price, pay my price. It's going to be a little bit trickier for buyers when the market looks like this, unless things start to shift in 2025 and more sellers come off the sidelines and bring inventory. All right, now one of my favorite economic indicators that gives you a read on the market is called months of supply. Months of supply is simply this. If you stop listing all homes in Windermere based on how many of those anemic buyer transactions actually are performed every month, how long would it take you to sell off all the inventory in the store? This is a feel indicator, okay? So ultimately, when you look at this chart, you say, Jared, what am I looking at? Well, for about a year straight, it started to go towards the buyer. So the higher up this graph the numbers go, that means buyers are gaining strength. You'll notice that 3 or 4 months now, it's going literally sideways. You'll also notice, if you look back in history, most of this marketplace, the feel of the market is 4.3 months to upwards of 5 or 6 months of time on market for everything to sell off based on how active the buying public is in Windermere. Now, this is 4.7 months. That is kind of towards the bottom range of what it used to be pre-pandemic. So if you are a seller in this market, as I sell real estate in this market, the marketplace in Windermere has a similar feel than pre-pandemic. You'd say, well, what do you mean? What about Dr. Phillips? Or what about Heathrow? What about Lake Nona? Lake Nona, I would say less so, but some of those other markets, the month of supply is well exceeding the way the market was pre-pandemic. So ultimately, it feels a little slower for sellers. Now, again, this is almost 5 months of supply. That's higher than the average for the entire Orlando Metro. Orlando Metro runs around 3.9, okay? These luxury markets, you'll have inventory that can sit on a market for a year, and it tends to move these numbers in different directions, okay? So ultimately, for Windermere, the number is still a little low, but you can see where the trend has been. So when I showed you the Reventure app data earlier, notice how it was a strong seller's market 2 years ago, and it started to drift down towards the buyer. Still on the seller side, slightly more in neutral territory. And again, that's exactly what months of supply is also saying. Months of supply, again, a brilliant indicator to give you an indication of the connection of supply and demand in real time. If you're in the Central Florida area and you're looking for a great church, I'd love for you to join me at the Grove Bible Chapel. Just visit joinmeatthegrove.com for full details. When you're buying or selling a home, the process itself can feel overwhelming. When this happens, you need a real estate expert that can turn this around for you. So all you need to do, make one call, that's all, and put nearly 4,000 homes sold and my 23 years of experience to work for you.
Jared Jones is the way to go. Call 706-5000.